What's up guys, SirAllAboutMusic here, bringing you a review for Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, released 1973. And Dark Side of the Moon is Floyd's defining album. This is their defining moment. This album dictated what the band did for pretty much the rest of their career. They couldn't get over that. And that's, whether you love it or you hate it, you have to acknowledge that. I hate Nirvana's Nevermind, but I have to acknowledge that that's their defining moment. That album was defined their sound for a lot of people. And but this album, as opposed to Nirvana's Nevermind, is awesome. It's a great album. It's fantastic. There's a reason why it was on the charts for 700 something weeks. And that's because it's a great album. And what makes it a great album is the variety in the songs. Not all the songs sound the same. There's a lot of stylistic differences. The fact that Floyd incorporated a bunch of different styles into the album, which gave it a pretty familiar sound. That incorporation of style made it more accessible to a lot of people. And it's a badass album. 3 big reasons why it's good. And really the cool thing for me is how Floyd synthesized all these different styles. There's jazz in here, there's a lot of blues influence in here, some soul, some classical influence in here, and they take all these styles that they've been influenced by and they synthesize them, and then they add a big heaping, spoonful of their own style, their own take on those musical styles. And so it ends up being something that's very accessible to a lot of different people, but doesn't sound like it was ripped off, and it is their own thing. So that's what really, for me, I think makes this such a landmark, iconic album, is the fact that it's very accessible, but it's completely new. It's something that, nobody had ever heard before. Some other things that I really like about it, besides the songwriting, is Dave Gilmour's solos. His solos on Atom Heart Mother and Metal are good. He's got some pretty good solo work on here. But he refines. Dark Side of the Moon is where he starts to refine his solos, and they become these gems. These very polished gems. When he recorded the solos, he would record a couple of different solos, and then he'd make a chart. He'd listen to each solo and he'd make a chart of which parts he liked and which parts he didn't, and then he synthesized all those parts. So what you have is like an alpha solo, an uber solo here, if you will. It's improvised, but it's also constructed at the same time, and that just allows these solos to be the best they can be. And he just gets better and better as Floyd makes albums, and really for me his solo work culminates in Animals. But that's for that album review. Album's very laid back, almost has a lounge feel to it in some points, but can get pretty intense, especially during Dave's solos. And there's, even though this is a rock album, it is extremely cerebral. It is very, very, very trippy, very heady, even when you're not on drugs. Not that I would know anything about that. So in that respect, it's a real psychedelic record, and it's fantastic like that. It gets really weird in some points. For the longest time, I didn't like Us and Them or Brain Damage. And really, I think that's because those two songs are extremely challenging. I think those are the most challenging songs on the record. They're pretty weird, and they don't stick to the overarching blues influence of the rest of the album. They get pretty weird. And other than that, I really don't have any stickler points about this. This album is just absolutely fantastic. Really, the only thing that bothers me about it is that from this point forward, Nick Mason's drumming starts to falter. If you watch Pink Floyd live at Pompeii and you listen to Floyd's earlier work, you'll know that Nick Mason is a fantastic drummer. He's a fucking amazing drummer. But you really don't hear that on the studio work after Dark Side of the Moon. And even in Dark Side of the Moon, his fills are great, you know, his drumming's great, but they're not at the level of amazingness that you see on Pink Floyd live at Pompeii. And, you know, as the years go on, it just seems that he becomes more of a metronome than a drummer. And that's a little disappointing. And this is where it really starts for me, I think. So it's a little disappointing, like I said. And there's one more thing I wanted to address, and that's the whole, they wrote this album while they were on drugs. Well, guess what? Nobody gives a fuck. Nobody gives a fuck. Who cares if they were high when they wrote the album? Does that make the music worse? No, it doesn't. Does that mean that they're not real musicians? No. And anybody who says that is that's bullshit. They wrote the music. It wasn't the drugs writing the music. It was them with their guitars writing the music. And they recorded that music, you know. They created it. It's their music. They did it. It doesn't matter if they were under the influence of anything, because the drugs are not an animate object. The drugs are not an animate object. The you know, if they were tripping LSD, the tablet of LSD didn't pick up a guitar and start to write the songs. They wrote the songs. It doesn't matter what state of mind they were under. Who gives a fuck, honestly? That's always really bothered me. You know, who cares? Who gives a flying fuck? All right, so I've done my rant, and that goes for the rest of the Floyd albums. Even The Wall. You know, who cares if they wrote it while they were under drugs? No one cares. If the music's good, it shouldn't be an issue. So that's all I gotta say. 4 points. Originality, fantastic. Like I said, even though they synthesized all these different influences, they really made this their own thing, so you can't complain. I love this album. It used to be, you know, this was the album that I was introduced to Floyd on, so it'll always have a very special place in my heart. In my heart. Flow is great. This is a concept album, you know. There's a lot of themes about death and mental illness and, you know, going crazy, and that mood just pervades over the entire album. And then Floyd made all these songs like kind of stream together, like one stream of consciousness kind of thing. And that just, you know, lends to the flow. It makes the flow even better. It makes the album more cohesive and stronger as a package. And then we get to production, which I have no complaints about at all. I have nothing to say about it. I think the production on here is great. So that's all I gotta say. I can give Dark Side of the Moon an 8.5 out of 10. Definitely 8.5 out of 10. So this is SirAllAboutMusic, Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. I'll see you guys next time.